The company called it strategic restructuring. I called it a mistake, signed in arrogance. And at 7:22, on a Thursday morning, 43 active construction sites across 6 states stopped at once because they forgot that behind every engineering number, there is a real person carrying the responsibility. Harper and Associates told everyone they were carrying out a strategic restructuring. I heard that phrase in conference rooms, in internal emails, in the way executives tried to make a cold decision sound more rational than it was. But to me, it was not strategy. It was carelessness wrapped in corporate language. And the truth came out at 7:22 on a Thursday morning, when 43 active construction projects across 6 states stopped at the same time. Not because of a storm. Not because workers walked out. Not because materials were delayed. Everything froze because of a single clause I had written into my employment contract 22 years earlier. My name is Emma Calloway. I am 58 years old. A licensed structural engineer. And I am going to tell you how a 34-year-old MBA, who thought he could erase me from payroll the way he deleted a cell in a spreadsheet, ended up standing in a parking garage with red eyes. I am not telling this story to prove that I was smarter than anyone. I am telling it because there are professions where value does not live in applause, corner offices, or polished presentation slides. There are professions where value lives in legal responsibility, in singatures, in seals, and in whether a bridge stays standing while tens of thousands of people cross it every day. For years, I believed the work would speak for me. I was only partly right. Work can speak, but some people choose not to listen. So I did what a good engineer always does. I calculated the load in advance, documented the structure clearly, and never built anything on a vague foundation. I joined Harper and Associates right after finishing graduate school in civil engineering, with a structural focus. Back then, the company had 11 employees, a modest office, a handful of old desks, and ambitions much larger than the floor space. I was young, and I was a woman in a field where conference rooms were often full of men. So, I learned quickly that being almost right was not good enough. I had to be clearly right. Numerically right. Right in a way no one could dismiss. My specialty was bridge design, load calculations, foundation analysis. The kind of work that sounds dry until you remember. It is the math standing between hundreds of thousands of people and a river. The years passed, and the company grew. 11 people became dozens, then more than 260 employees. Many of the projects Harper and Associates proudly used in its marketing were projects I had designed, reviewed, or supervised technically. The Fairview Overpass, the Route 9 connector, the Brookfield pedestrian bridge that won a state design award in 2019. My name was not on the gates of those projects, but my license number was in the files. My signature was on the drawings. My responsibility was under the concrete, inside the load-bearing steel, in the numbers that could not be wrong. I was never the brightest personality at company parties. I was not good at glossy speeches, and I never wanted to turn myself into a symbol. Engineering does not reward performance. Engineering rewards precision. Either you get the numbers right, or the structure may fail. Simple, ruthless, and fair in a way that is almost beautiful. That was what I respected most about the profession. And it was also what Tyler Grant never truly understood. Tyler Grant arrived at the company about 18 months before everything collapsed. He had an MBA from a well-known university, famous mostly because its football team was always on television, a father who sat on the board of directors, and the absolute confidence of the kind of person who had never been forced to live with the direct consequences of his own decisions. His title was Vice President of Engineering Operations. I remember seeing that phrase in the internal announcement and stopping on the word operations. It was doing a lot of work in that title. Because Tyler was not an engineer. He did not understand drawings as a language, did not look at a section and immediately think of loads. We did not hear the word foundation and automatically think of soil, water, lateral pressure, and survey tolerance. Within less than 2 months, Tyler had reorganized the project management workflow, introduced billing software no one had asked for, and forced everyone into 15-minute standing meetings every Monday morning. Those meetings rarely solved anything except making engineers late for the work that actually mattered. He called it agile methodology. I called it theater. Tyler learned my name after about 4 months. Not because he made an effort, but because William Harper, the company CEO, mentioned me during a quarterly review. William said I held the professional engineering certifications of record for the active infrastructure portfolio, and that I was essentially the legal spine of the engineering division. Tyler nodded as though he understood, but his eyes told me he had only heard a function that could be priced. If you have ever watched someone be underestimated because their work is foundational instead of flashy. Comment number 1, so I know you understand that feeling. In March, Tyler called me into his office. It had once belonged to William before William moved up to the executive suite. So it had large windows, a wide desk, leather chairs, and the kind of atmosphere that makes people new to power confuse where they sit with what they know. Tyler did not really invite me to sit. He said my name, pointed toward the chair, and kept his eyes on his laptop. I sat down with my back straight, not because I was nervous, but because I was used to walking into rooms where other people believed they controlled the story. Tyler said he had been doing a deep dive into resource allocation and wanted to discuss my role. He said my compensation sat at the top of the band, significantly above market for someone in a non-client-facing position. That phrase made me go silent for a few seconds. Non-client-facing. As if the people driving over my bridges were not clients. As if the wall protecting a road had no one depending on it. Then he talked about outsourcing P stamps, structural reviews, and technical responsibility to a third-party certification partner in Denver. His tone was as light as if he were talking about switching paper suppliers. I looked at him and repeated it back. Just to make sure I had heard correctly, he was talking about outsourcing the professional engineer of record function for active projects. Tyler said, "In a sense, yes," and added that it was a growing sector. I kept my voice calm. Because in my profession, panic has never made a structure stronger. I told him that every active permitted project was tied to my PE license number. That engineering boards in 6 states had my name on file as the responsible engineer. And that this could not be transferred to a contractor just because a spreadsheet made it look cheaper. I told Tyler to speak with Rebecca Gray before doing anything else. Rebecca was Harper and Associates' general counsel. Sharp, thorough, and almost completely impatient with problems that could have been avoided if someone had read the relevant law. Tyler nodded, leaned back, and looked as if he were generously allowing me to contribute. He said he would keep it in mind. I left that office and walked past framed photographs of projects I had designed, past my professional license on the wall, past the cabinet that held more than 22 years of stamped drawings. A strange feeling settled inside me. It was not anger. Anger is hot, loud, and often makes people careless. This was colder and clearer. Like seeing a small crack in concrete and knowing the real problem is deeper inside. I understood that this was no longer a foolish idea floating around a meeting room. The man they had handed authority to genuinely believed engineering was a procurement problem. That evening, I went home, ate something simple, and opened a document folder I had not touched in years. Inside was my employment contract, 31 pages, with a clause buried in section 14. Addendum B. I had negotiated that clause in 2002, when the company had nearly been acquired by a national chain and the prospective new owners hinted that I was not essential personnel. The clause stated that the designated licensed professional engineer of record must maintain active compensated employment status for the duration of any project where that engineer's license number appeared on submitted permit documentation, if that engineer was terminated. to resigned, or removed from compensated status for more than 72 hours. The firm had to notify the relevant state engineering boards, and affected permits could be subject to mandatory suspension until a replacement licensed engineer was appointed and approved. If this story feels worth following, leave a like on the video, because sometimes one small contract clause can keep an entire system from collapsing. I read that clause several times in silence. I was not reading because I was surprised. I had written it myself. Every sentence, every phrase, every space clear enough that no one could claim they misunderstood it. I read it because I wanted to make sure memory had not embellished anything after 22 years. It had not. The clause was still there. Cold, legal, and precise. Like a load calculation. I emailed Rebecca at 9:17 that night. The subject was simple: question on licensure continuity. Section 14. Addendum B. The body was only a few sentences. I said I had heard mention of a possible restructuring of the PE of record function and wanted to make sure she was aware of the relevant contract language before any decisions were finalized. I attached the full agreement. The next morning, Rebecca was at my desk at 8:05. She did not sit down at first. Her face had the look of a lawyer who had just seen a legal exposure large enough to swallow a company. She asked me about the contract. I said yes. She asked whether Tyler had read it. I said I assumed not. Then she pulled up a chair, lowered her voice, and asked me to walk her through the exposure. I opened the active project portfolio, 43 projects across 6 states. Bridges, overpasses, a pedestrian walkway system for a city redevelopment project, 2 highway ramps in Georgia, a culvert replacement program in Pennsylvania that was halfway through construction. Every one of them was permitted under my license number. I told her that if I was removed from active compensated employment status, the contract required notification to the state boards. The boards would suspend the permits. Construction would stop. All of it. Rebecca asked what would happen if concrete was already being poured. I said they would still have to stop. She was quiet for a moment, and I could see that she understood what Tyler had not. Technical responsibility is not something you can transfer with an email. Rebecca asked how long it would take to replace me. Not to replace an employee in an organization chart, but to replace the professional engineer of record for 43 projects that the new engineer had not designed, had not supervised from the beginning, and would need 6 state boards to approve. I told her 90 days at a minimum, but realistically closer to 6 months. Some states had backlogs. Some boards met only quarterly. A qualified licensed engineer would also hesitate before accepting legal responsibility for active construction projects they had not personally followed. Rebecca closed her eyes for about 2 seconds, then opened them. She asked how long I had been sitting on this. I said since 2002. She asked whether anyone else knew. I said I had mentioned it to Tyler the day before and told him to talk to her. Rebecca stood and said she needed to brief William. I knew she would. After she left, I poured coffee and went back to calculations for a retaining wall in North Carolina. The numbers were still the numbers. They did not care about office politics, Tyler's ego, or who had a father on the board. Over the next 2 days, Tyler did not contact me. The Monday morning meetings vanished from the calendar. His assistant canceled several meetings. On the surface, the company looked normal. But after 2 decades, I knew what that kind of silence smelled like. It was the silence of senior people, realizing that something was very wrong and not yet knowing how to say it. That afternoon, a recruiter I had spoken with 6 months earlier called again. A regional engineering director role with a competitor. Good salary. More autonomy. An interesting portfolio. I told her I needed a few weeks. She said the role was mine if I wanted it. I hung up and, for the first time in many years, wondered whether my loyalty had been placed in the wrong hands. That evening, I sat on my porch. My daughter Lily was home for spring break. She was 19. studying architecture at the State University. Sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a pencil tucked behind her ear, the way she had done since she was 8. I watched her through the sliding glass door and thought about her tuition. Undergraduate school was already expensive. Graduate school would be more. And I knew Lily would go. Because that child had the eyes of someone who did not stop halfway. For 22 years, I had received my year-end bonus. Not a single miss. I had counted on that bonus for her education fund. Then I thought about Tyler's phrase, non-client facing. As if the people driving across bridges were not clients. As if a city waiting for a retaining wall was not a client. As if value only existed when it wore a suit. Held a laser pointer. And stood in front of a conference room. My ex-husband once told me years earlier that I gave too much to that company. And that the company would never fully see me. At the time, I disagreed. I believed that if I did the work well enough, long enough, and precisely enough, it would eventually be understood. That night, I was no longer sure. I went inside, made dinner, and helped Lily with the load path analysis for a mixed-use building in her studio project. She was stuck in one place. Frowning and annoyed with herself, we sat together for almost an hour. Moving from loads to columns. From columns to foundations. From assumptions to verification. Eventually, she understood. She looked at me and said, "Mum, you are kind of a genius." I told her I was just a civil engineer, and that it was mostly math. She rolled her eyes and said that was the same thing. If you have not subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next. Because the real story begins when the company decides to sign something it does not understand. The termination notice arrived on a Tuesday. 4 weeks of severance. Standard language. Position eliminated as part of strategic restructuring. Tyler's signature was at the bottom. William's initials were in the corner. I read it once. Set the paper on my desk. Picked up the phone. And called Rebecca. I told her I had received the notice. There was a pause on the other end. Then she said she wanted me to know she had advised against this decision very strongly. More than once. I told her I knew. She explained that Tyler had convinced William the legal risk was manageable. And that he could get a replacement PE, credentialed within the transition window. I said he could not. Rebecca said she knew he could not. And she had been telling him that for 6 weeks. I kept my voice level. I did not want her to hear the hurt in me. Because hurt is too easily interpreted as weakness. I simply said she knew what had to happen next. The contract required notice to the state engineering boards within 72 hours of my removal from compensated status. Rebecca said yes. I said I would not interfere with that process. But I would not facilitate a workaround either. She understood. After the call, I spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning out my desk. I did it slowly and methodically. My framed professional license. The photograph from the Fairview overpass ribbon cutting. The mug Lily had given me that said, "World's okayest structural engineer." I did not take a single company file. I did not copy project documents. I did not touch anything that was not mine. My personal logs. My own methodology notes. Those came with me. Everything else stayed exactly where it was, if they wanted to believe I was not essential. I would show them the difference between leaving responsibly and leaving chaos behind. At 5 o'clock, information technology deactivated my credentials. I turned in my keycard and passed the reception desk. Nora Blake, who had been there almost as long as I had, looked at me with eyes that did not need many words. She told me to take care of myself. I smiled and told her to do the same. I drove home, fed the dog, boiled pasta, watched an hour of television I barely remember, and went to bed. 72 hours is 3 days. Rebecca, in her usual style, had created a compliance calendar as soon as I sent the contract. Back when she was still trying to prevent all of this from happening. By Thursday evening, Notifications had gone to all 6 state engineering boards. On Friday morning, I went fishing. There is a small lake about 40 minutes from my house. The same place my father used to take me when I was a little girl. I still use his rod. The fish do not always bite there. But fishing has never really been about catching fish. I sat for 4 hours and let my mind drift through thoughts that did not have words. By noon, my phone had 12 missed calls. I did not check them right away, because I had a general idea of who was calling. I drove home, showered, made a sandwich, and sat down to listen to the voicemails. The Georgia Department of Transportation notified Harper and Associates that a permit had been flagged due to a professional engineer of record status change, and that all active construction activities should stop immediately. The Pennsylvania Environmental Agency sent a similar notice for 2 projects. North Carolina called about the retaining wall project in active construction. And they sounded deeply unhappy because that job was already under a tight municipal deadline. Maryland, Virginia, and Florida followed. 7 messages from state agencies. The 8th was from Rebecca. Her voice sounded tired, but not surprised. She asked me to call when I could. Not to negotiate. Just to confirm I had received everything. I called Rebecca back and told her I had received it. She hesitated. Then said William wanted a meeting the next morning. I said my attorney would need to be present. She said, of course. Then I added that Tyler was not to be in the room. Rebecca was silent for a few seconds. Probably because she knew that would be politically difficult. But I did not let my statement sound like a personal preference. I made it clear that it was not a suggestion. On Saturday morning, I walked into William Harper's office. Real wood desk. Photographs of major company projects on the walls. Going back to the years when his father ran the firm. William was 64. Second generation of the founding family, to be honest. Over the years, he had treated me reasonably well. We were not close, but he had been decent in the way of someone who knew who made the work function. Even if he did not always say it aloud. He stood and shook my hand. I shook his because we had known each other long enough to keep that courtesy. My attorney, Nathan Cole, sat to my left. He was about 60. Compact. And so precise when he spoke that you could almost hear the billing clock in each sentence. Rebecca sat across from us. 2 board members were also present. Tyler was not in the room. William began by saying he understood the position the company had put me in and that this had not been handled properly. I cut in gently, not rudely, just clearly. I said I had had a long career, did not need a preamble, and wanted to talk about the actual cost. Nathan slid a 3-page document across the table. We had prepared it earlier not because we knew they would terminate me, but because since March, I had known it was possible. Preparation is not paranoia. To me, preparation is engineering. Nathan laid out the demand, full payment of severance according to the contract. Not the modified offer in the termination letter. Additional compensation for breach of the professional engineer of record continuity obligation under Section 14, and a consulting retainer for me to support the PE transition on a realistic timeline. One board member leaned forward, trying to find a gap, and said the notification requirement was contractual. Rebecca calmly corrected him. She said that regardless of the contract, once the professional engineer of record status changed, the company had a statutory obligation to notify the relevant state boards. Tyler's idea that the company could manage a quiet internal transition was incorrect. She had documented that in a memo 6 weeks earlier. Then she slid her own document across the table. I had not seen that memo before, but from the way William read it, I knew it was not soft. Rebecca had underlined one recommendation: do not proceed with restructuring until PE of record continuity is resolved. William set the memo down, his jaw tight. He asked how long it would take to get operations running again. Nathan said that finding a licensed engineer willing to assume responsibility for 43 projects across 6 states getting that person accepted by the boards, and completing the file transfers would take 90 to 180 days by Rebecca's estimate. We believed that was optimistic. Georgia's board met quarterly. North Carolina had a backlog. In a worst-case scenario, the company could be looking at 8 months before being fully operational again. When William asked about mid-construction projects, I spoke. I said the retaining wall project in Mecklenburg County was the critical one. They had already poured the first section. If it stopped and sat for months, there could be structural integrity questions, possibly requiring demolition and a restart because that section had not been designed to stand alone for that long. That was the client's problem. But it was also Harper and Associates' liability problem. Finally, William looked at the number at the bottom of Nathan's document. He asked what we were really talking about. Nathan pointed to the final line, $890,000. That number included the base severance owed under the contract, the breach penalty under Addendum B, and a consulting retainer for me to facilitate the professional engineer of record transition. Nathan said that with my involvement, the projects could be back online in about 60 days instead of 8 months. I would assist with credentialing the replacement engineer, prepare documentation, respond to state board inquiries, and keep the process from becoming a second disaster. The room went silent. William looked at Rebecca. She did not nod or shake her head. She simply held his gaze with the calm of a lawyer who had already told the truth. William said it was leverage. He did not say it as an accusation, only as a naming of the situation. I said it was a contract. A contract I had negotiated in good faith 22 years earlier. A contract that had been in the legal department the entire time Tyler was planning his restructuring. A contract Rebecca had tried to get him to read. The leverage had always existed. The only thing that changed was that someone decided to treat me like a line item. William looked down at his hands, then out the window. He asked whether there was any version of this where I would not have used the clause. I thought honestly before answering. I said if he had come to me directly, told me the company needed to reduce costs, and asked what options existed, then yes, there could have been an early retirement package, consulting transition, or structured handoff. We could have found a way, but Tyler told me it was not personal, then removed me from the organization chart without speaking to me. That was not restructuring. That was the act of someone who did not think I mattered enough to deserve a conversation. William sat still for a long moment. Then he asked Rebecca where Tyler was in the building. She said she had asked Tyler not to attend the meeting. But William said he wanted to know where he was right then. Rebecca answered that he was probably in his office. William nodded slowly and asked for a few minutes alone. Nathan and I stepped out and walked to the small kitchen at the end of the hall. I poured water. Nathan checked his phone, then said they would accept. He also said I could have pushed for more. I knew that. He asked why I had not. I thought for a moment, then said $890,000 was what they owed. More than that would be punishment. I was not interested in punishment. I only wanted them to understand that I was not disposable. 20 minutes later, we went back in. The 2 board members were gone. Rebecca was still there. William said the company would accept the terms, with the full wire transfer on Monday. He looked at me and said he wanted to say something, and that he meant it. He said he should have read the contract himself. When Tyler brought him the plan, he should have gone back to the original agreement. He had not, and that was on him. I nodded once. I appreciated hearing it, even if it came late. Nathan mentioned the written acknowledgement included in the terms. Rebecca said the company would draft it, and William would read it personally at the next all-staff meeting. We shook hands. At the door, I turned back and told William that whoever replaced me needed the same protections in their contract. Put their name on the first page. Not page 27. Not for their sake, but for the company's. William said Rebecca was already drafting it. I looked at Rebecca, and she gave a small nod. This time, at least someone had learned the right lesson. On Monday morning, the The money cleared at 11:14. $890,000. I sat with the notification for a while, not because I felt the joy of a big win, but because it was strange to see 22 years of being underestimated suddenly converted into a visible number. I opened my laptop and made 3 transfers. A large portion went into Lily's education fund. From that day forward, the graduate school was no longer a financial question for her. It was only a question of which program she would choose. Another portion went into retirement, making retirement a genuine near-term possibility instead of a distant abstraction. And I wrote a check to the youth engineering camp where I had volunteered for a decade. They had been trying to raise money for new equipment for 2 years, and I had been meaning to give more for just as long. That afternoon, Rebecca sent me a photograph. It was a slide from the all-staff meeting. On the big screen were the words honoring Emma Calloway, P.E., for more than 22 years of engineering excellence. Below that was a list of projects: the Fairview Overpass, the Route 9 connector, the Brookfield Pedestrian Bridge, the North Carolina project, and many others named individually. The final line said that I had been the principal engineer of record, the structural foundation of the firm's infrastructure portfolio. Rebecca's message said William read every word. Tyler was in the back row. I did not respond to that part. I only texted Rebecca to thank her for everything. She replied that this time she had put the clause on the first page, in bold. I smiled, not because I was gloating, but because an expensive lesson had finally been written in the right place. That evening, Lily came out to the porch and sat beside me. She had seen the acknowledgement slide, probably because the company-wide email had still gone to my old account before information technology finished cleaning things up. She said, "Mom," very softly, just one word, but I could hear both concern and confusion in it. I said it was a long story. She told me to tell it. I looked at the yard, at the dog investigating the fence line, and considered how to explain it without turning everything into a bitter lecture about business. Lily said her father had told her I received a settlement. I nodded. She asked if working there had been that bad. The question made me silent longer than I expected. I told her the work was not bad. The work was good. I loved the work. I loved the feeling of watching a complex problem become clear through calculation. I loved knowing that if I did my job correctly, a bridge would stand through storms, a road would be safer, and a city would function better. The bad part was that someone decided the work did not have a person attached to it. They saw the drawings but not the person responsible behind the drawings. Lily sat quietly for a moment, then said, "And you made them understand that it did." I gave a small laugh and said something like that. She asked how. I said, "I read the contract." She laughed once, then became serious and asked whether I was okay. I thought carefully before answering, because I did not want to lie to my daughter. Finally, I said yes. I thought I actually was. Lily leaned over and rested her head on my shoulder for a moment. Only a moment, because she was grown, and grown children have limits. But that moment was enough to tell me I had not only protected my career, I had also protected the image my daughter would carry when she thought about the value of a woman who took her work seriously. I returned to Harper & Associates on Wednesday, but no longer as an employee who could be treated like a line item. I returned as a consultant, working 2 days a week to help transition the professional engineer of record function to my replacement. The new engineer was Diane Foster, 50 years old, with a decade of experience at a state transportation department. From the first meeting, I knew she understood the work. She did not try to prove herself with empty language. She asked the right questions: the status of each permit, the completeness of each file, which projects carried the highest construction risk, which state boards needed in-person meetings, and which clients needed to be reassured with data rather than promises. I did everything I could to make the transition smooth. I introduced Diane to board representatives where possible. I prepared documentation more detailed than anything the company had ever required from me before. not to help Tyler, and not to protect William's reputation, but because I wanted Diane to have what she needed to stand firmly. A good engineer does not punish a successor by leaving chaos behind. Tyler was reassigned before my consulting engagement ended. His new title was Director of Strategic Initiatives, with an office on another floor and no direct reports. That was William's way of handling it without a public firing. The kind of soft landing often reserved for someone whose father sits on the board. I had nothing to say about it. It was no longer my business. For 61 days, I did exactly what I had agreed to do. I helped the permits transfer legally, helped the projects return, helped Diane understand every thread of responsibility. When I watched her sign her first documents as engineer of record, I felt relieved. Not because I had been replaced, but because the role was finally in the hands of someone who understood its weight. On the last day of my consulting engagement, Diane walked me to the lobby. We shook hands. She asked if there was anything she should know about the work, the projects, or the firm. I thought for a moment and said that most of them were decent people. They had simply forgotten for a while that buildings and bridges stand because of engineers, not presentations. Then I added, do not let them forget again. Diane nodded and said she already had it in writing. On the first page. After that, I drove straight to Lily's campus. She was in her studio, hair tied up messily, hands dusted with model material, working on a small transit hub design with a timber frame and adaptive structure. She showed me her load calculations. I found one error. It was not huge, but it was enough that if ignored, everything downstream would drift. We fixed it in about 8 minutes. Lily looked at me, half annoyed and half affectionate, and told me I was insufferable. I said she was going to be a great engineer. She corrected me immediately, architect. I said one of the good architects. The kind who actually understands structure. She rolled her eyes. But she smiled. In that moment, I realized something I had probably known for a long time. Building things is not only about concrete, steel, or drawings. It is also about how one generation passes respect for precision to the next. I did not need Lily to become a copy of me. I only wanted her to enter her profession knowing that beauty cannot stand for long without structure. And neither can self-respect. You may be underestimated. You may be called too expensive, too careful, too difficult to replace. But if you truly understand your work, make sure the world does not only hear you say so. Make sure your responsibility is written somewhere no one can pretend not to see. The strange thing about building things, whether bridges, buildings, systems, or careers, is that the work does not disappear when you leave the room. The Fairview overpass still carries traffic every day. The Route 9 connector has been in service for more than a decade. Somewhere in North Carolina, a retaining wall is still holding back a hillside in the rain. My name is not on a public sign. Drivers will not know I once stayed up late, checking the safety factor again. Pedestrians crossing a bridge will not know I argued with a contractor about a steel connection detail. The city benefiting from the work may never know who Emma Calloway is. And honestly, that was never the point. The point was that the work was real. And real work requires someone who understands what they are doing. For 22 years, I was that person. I knew my value before anyone else acknowledged it. My mistake, if I had one, was believing that value always protects itself through quality alone. But quality needs records. Responsibility needs writing. Experience needs to be placed inside a structure other people cannot casually push aside. Some people call what I did leverage. Some call it revenge. I call it engineering. You account for every load, including the load created by someone else's ego. You do not build on the assumption that people in power will do the right thing. You design so the system still stands when someone does the wrong thing. And you always document your work. Not because you hope to use it someday, but because in the real world, anything not written down is too easy to deny. I did not leave Harper and Associates with a loud sense of victory. I left with the quiet certainty that I had left the structures sound, the files clean, and the lesson clear enough for those who remained. The new boat is sitting in my driveway now, waiting for spring. Nothing too fancy. 16 feet long. A reliable outboard motor. Good enough for the small lake, where my father once taught me how to cast a line and sit quietly with my own thoughts. Lily says she wants to come fishing with me someday. I told her she would have to put her phone down. She said she would. We will see. But I am looking forward to it more than I expected. I think part of my life has always been tied to keeping things from collapsing. Bridges, retaining walls, projects, files, and sometimes my own self-respect. Now, for the first time in many years, I can sit in front of the water and not have to prove anything to anyone. I am no longer the woman trying to work twice as hard to be considered good enough in a room full of people who think titles matter more than responsibility. I am Emma Calloway, structural engineer, the woman who calculated her own load correctly and made sure it was documented. If there is anything worth remembering from this story, it is not the money, not the halted projects, and not Tyler being moved to another floor with a title even emptier than the last one. The thing worth remembering is this: never let someone else define your value just because they do not understand the work you do. Know which part of the bridge you are holding. Know what your signature weighs, and when necessary, protect it with the coldest, clearest, most decent preparation you can manage. Thank you for watching the entire video. If this story reached you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and remember that sometimes self-respect does not need to shout. It only needs to be written in the right place, in language no one can ignore.